Alyza.
Very exciting to be here and to see all of you here, and I thank the ICC for bringing us all together and for inviting me to participate in this panel. The Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law is a non-profit organization that was established a little more than 10 years ago by a civil rights lawyer named Ken Marcus. The mission of the organization is to advance the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and promote justice for all. We're not affiliated with Brandeis University. We're a completely and totally separate nonprofit organization just named for the same justice. We're based here in Washington, D.C., but we work with students across the country. One of the things that Ken Marcus, our founder, is known for is what's now been referred to as the Marcus policy or the Marcus doctrine, which is the understanding and interpretation and application of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is what is used now most frequently to try and protect students on campus from harassment and discrimination. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act requires universities to make sure that all students have equal access to all the educational opportunities that that university provides, and if they fail to protect students from harassment and discrimination to the point where students are being denied that equal access and that equal opportunity, then the universities risk losing their federal funding. It's a very powerful tool.
Alyza, I'd like to hear more about Title VI and how Title VI might be useful to our students here today.
When I became president of the Lewin Brandeis Center about 4 years ago, that's when I started interacting with students on an almost daily basis. And I realized that one of the main problems we have on campuses is not that university administrators don't want to help our students. It's that the university administrators could not see the anti-Semitism that was taking place. They mistakenly thought that what they were witnessing on campus was just a political debate. And hey, that's what universities are all about, right? This exchange of ideas. So if on the one hand you have pro-Palestinian students and on the other hand you have pro-Israeli students, in this country, speech is protected. Even hate speech is protected speech. So from the university's perspective, their feeling was, what do you want from us? Don't expect us to silence anybody, and certainly don't expect us to pick a side, but they misunderstood what was happening in front of them. They didn't realize and they didn't understand that this is not about politics. This is not about speech. There may be some people on your campus who really do want to engage with you in those conversations, but overwhelmingly, the very loud, vocal, aggressive noise that's coming, what it's really doing is it's marginalizing, it's isolating, it's shunning, it's ostracizing students on the basis of their identity. That is unlawful harassment and discrimination when it gets to the point that students are being denied that equal access, that equal opportunity. When, for example, there was a recent Brandeis Center case that was in the news involving Rose Rich, who was a student at the University of Southern California who 2 years ago was the subject of a horrific online campaign to impeach her from her position as student government vice president. Why? Because she was a Zionist. And presumably, if you're a Zionist, you must be a racist, and if you're a racist, you're unfit to represent us in student government, and so she needed to be impeached, was the idea of this campaign. The Brandeis Center represented her. We got that impeachment hearing canceled, and ultimately we ended up having to file a complaint with the Department of Education, and the Department of Education just now recently opened up a formal investigation. The thing to understand, and what 2 years ago people had a hard time seeing, is that Rose Rich wasn't getting pushed out on the basis of politics. Rose Rich was getting pushed out on the basis of her Zionist identity, the Zionist component of her Jewish identity. What is Zionism? Zionism is actually not just a liberation movement. Zionism now today, right, that's the pride that Jews take. It's the expression of pride that Jews have in their sense of Jewish peoplehood and in the historic connection that the Jews have to their ancestral Jewish homeland, the land of Israel. If I am excited that there is actually one tiny country in the world where the Jewish calendar is the national calendar, so I don't have to worry about having to reschedule a midterm exam on Yom Kippur, or I don't have to worry about being able to get kosher food, what is that? That's a pride in my Jewish identity and the fact that the Jewish people have a state where that's the fact. If I'm excited when I go there that Hebrew is the spoken language, our ancient Jewish language is the spoken language, so I'm actually proud to wear the name of my college in Hebrew letters, or have the names of my sports teams, or any of these other logos in Hebrew letters. What is that? That's not politics. That's expression of pride in my identity as a Jew and my Jewish heritage. If I want to put pictures from my trip to Israel, I climbed Masada, or I visited the Western Wall, and I want to put that on social media, that's not politics. That's an expression of pride in my identity as a Jew and my pride in my Jewish heritage and my Jewish history, which is rooted there. If I believe and I recognize that anti-Semitism for centuries has targeted Jews, and we've seen what's happened time and time again historically, that when societies become unhealthy, when people are not happy, when things aren't going well, and they start to look for someone to blame for their misfortune, for why things aren't going well, Jews are always the first scapegoat. And we know and we see what's happened to Jews historically over the centuries. So if I believe that it's really important for there to be a safety net for Jews in this world, for there to be a place that Jews are always welcome, where Jews can go, that's in part because I'm concerned about the safety and security of my people, the Jewish people. That's not politics. The most important thing today is for administrators and society to recognize that what is taking place today is the marginalization and shunning of those individuals who are expressing pride in that identity. It's not a political debate. And I'll explain to you why, when you understand the law, it's so extremely important for people to understand that piece. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act says, no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Almost every single university in the United States receives some amount of federal funds. Very, very small number are purely privately funded. That's why even private universities as well as public are covered by Title VI. But there's a key problem if you just look at the language of Title VI. Title VI doesn't include religion as a protected category. It talks about race, color, and national origin. So how are you going to protect Jews or other members of faith groups from discrimination if religion is not a protected category? Well, that's where, as I said, Ken Marcus came along. In 2004, after 9/11, there were members of faith-based groups who were experiencing serious harassment and discrimination in educational institutions. Muslims in particular after 9/11, and Sikhs, who were being mistaken for Muslims, were suffering tremendously. They filed complaints because either if you feel Title VI has been violated, you can go to federal court, or what's much more common is people file administrative complaints with the Department of Education, and there's an office there called the Office for Civil Rights, OCR, that reviews those complaints. That's the usual avenue, and that's one that frequently our organizations use. But OCR was saying, we can't even cover these complaints. We don't have jurisdiction because religion's not covered, and these are members of faith-based groups. So what Ken Marcus, who was then the head of the Office for Civil Rights, did is he said, no, wait a minute. If members of faith-based groups are being discriminated against on any of these other categories, race, national, ethnic origin, of course they still have the protection of Title VI. They don't lose that just because they're also a member of a faith-based group. So he wrote a Dear Colleague letter that explains that understanding of Title VI. That was in the Bush administration. 6 years later, in 2010, during the Obama administration, the Department of Justice adopted that same understanding of Title VI. Key language says, although Title VI does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of religion, discrimination against Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and members of other religious groups violates Title VI when that discrimination is based on the group's actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics rather than the member's religious practice. So this is now during the Obama administration. They are also saying Title VI protects you if the discrimination is based on your shared ancestry and ethnicity. What's the Jews' shared ancestry and ethnicity? It's our Zionism. And not only did the Department of Justice adopt that, the Department of Education said, well, what do universities, what do educational institutions have to do when they find that there is a hostile environment? And what is a hostile environment? A hostile environment is created when, quote, the conduct is sufficiently severe, pervasive, or persistent so as to interfere with or limit a student's ability to participate in or benefit from the services, activities, or opportunities offered by a school. So pushing Rose Rich out of her office in student government, that's an educational opportunity serving in student government. When you are being told that if you want to engage in any of those areas that you feel strongly about, women's rights, LGBT rights, immigration issues, climate change, and you're being told, okay, you can join us on one condition. You can join our racial justice movement as long as you first condemn Israel. You shed that Zionist part of your Jewish identity. You shed that pride in your Jewish peoplehood, and then you're welcome to join us. That is unlawful harassment and discrimination. If you feel that you are being kept out and denied that opportunity, that is unlawful. That's when we need to help you. And as Yael just said, you can do that anonymously. But it is really important for your sake and the sake of the other students, and quite frankly, the sake of our country, that you help people see this form of harassment and discrimination. I had a student who came to me. She showed me a photograph. Every week, there was a day where all the clubs would come out and they'd table, so everybody knew what the different extracurricular opportunities were. And she had been tabling for the ZOA. And SJP took a picture of her, said Zionism equals white supremacy. Why are they even permitted at our, and this tabling event had a name, each week. And she said, they blurred my face, but I don't feel safe. People know who I am, they know I'm part of the ZOA. I don't feel safe that they put this. I want to go to the administration. I said, that's good. But also make sure the administration sees the second part of this. Because what are they saying? They're saying that you as a Zionist are not welcome in what's basically the public square, where everybody else is welcome to talk about whatever the heck they want to talk about, but only Zionists should be excluded from it. And when she did that, she actually felt heard. Because when universities start to see and understand where this is going, they are concerned. Now, if it hasn't reached the point of exclusion, many of them will say, okay, there's nothing we can do yet. It's just speech. But there is something they can do. They can use their own speech. The Department of Education in 2010 came out with its own letter where not only did they describe a hostile environment, but they talked about what the educational institutions are supposed to do. And what they say here is, and this is the quote is there, if an investigation reveals that discriminatory harassment has occurred, a school must take prompt and effective steps reasonably calculated to end the harassment, eliminate any hostile environment and its effects, and prevent the harassment from recurring. Now, there's nothing to keep universities from using their own voice. At the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where as a result of a complaint that the Brandeis Center filed, there's a current open pending investigation by the Office for Civil Rights. The first step that we got the university to do was issue a joint statement. But in this joint statement, they talk about, and here's an excerpt, this is coming from the Chancellor of UIUC. He notes, for many Jewish students, and I'm quoting, Zionism is an integral part of their identity and their ethnic and ancestral heritage. These students have the right to openly express identification with Israel. The university will safeguard the abilities of these students, as well as all students, to participate in university-sponsored activities free from discrimination and harassment. We deplore anti-Semitic incidents on campus, including those that demonize or delegitimize Jewish and pro-Israel students or compare them to Nazis. This subjects them to double standards that are not applied to others. All Jewish students, including those who identify with Israel or Jewish campus organizations, should be able to participate in campus activities aimed at fighting racism and achieving social justice. See if you can get your universities to issue a similar statement. They need to start educating their community that this type of marginalization and these kinds of noises are just not acceptable, and get them to try and use their voice to address that. The Brandeis Center has what we call our Jigsaw Fellows. Those are law students that we've trained to understand Title VI, this area of the law, so that they're available to work with and support and provide guidance and assistance. And obviously we're supervising them, but sometimes it's easier for students to talk to students.
My question relates to IRA and passing IRA on a university and student government level. What is your opinion on whether or not IRA can be beneficial, or if we should just default to what you've been talking about with Title VI?
I think that IRA is an incredibly important tool. In 2010, and you should realize IRA didn't come out until 2016, the 2010 definition adopted by the Obama administration State Department breaks up the contemporary examples that relate to Israel according to what you heard yesterday, the Natan Sharansky 3Ds. So if you go and you read that, you'll actually see and really understand what demonization, delegitimization, and double standard is if you read the 2010 definition, because it breaks it up that way. But also what you'll then see is if you go and look for those same contemporary examples in the IRA definition, you'll realize that that's where the anti-Zionists, what are they pushing, what are they combating? They're criticizing those specific examples. Those are the examples that are the examples of demonization, delegitimization, double standard. Those are the examples of when the criticism of Israel, that might otherwise be considered legitimate criticism of a foreign government like you'd criticize any other foreign government, when it crosses the line into anti-Semitism, those are the examples they're trying to get rid of. Because they're trying to suggest that it's never anti-Semitism. The anti-Zionism is never anti-Semitism. And the problem we have today is that that's exactly the form of anti-Semitism that people have a hard time recognizing. My quick little discussion of anti-Semitism and why this is so important. Anti-Semitism may be our society's oldest hatred, but it's one of the most difficult to recognize and understand. And that's because anti-Semitism morphs. The anti-Semitism of centuries ago doesn't look exactly like the anti-Semitism of today. There's one constant, however. Anti-Semitism, as I said earlier, always takes whatever is that generation's greatest evil, whatever that society views as its misfortune, and it pins it on the Jew. The Jew becomes the scapegoat. And as Erwin Cutler said, and I love this, he explains, what did traditional anti-Semitism do? Anti-Semitism would seek to deny individual Jews their place in society. Think about that yellow Star of David that the Nazis had the Jews wear. What was that? That was the symbol that said, you don't engage with that person. You don't shop in their stores. You don't use them as your professionals, as your lawyers, as your doctors. You shun them. You exclude them. That's traditional anti-Semitism. Contemporary anti-Semitism seeks to do that same thing to the Jewish collective. We now have a Jewish collective. We have a Jewish nation state. The Jewish people have a home. We're back in our ancestral home. And what's happening? We're now see people taking society's greatest evil, pinning it on the Jewish collective. Why? To deny that one and only Jewish state its place in the society of nations. So if you realize that what today's society views as its greatest evil are the issues of racism, apartheid, settler colonialism, it's not only now that all Jews are considered white, no matter what our background or where we're from. It's not just individual Jews that are being blamed as the colonialists and the oppressors. It's now, look at that. What do people say is the country that's the worst offender when it comes to human rights violations? They say it's not China with the Uyghurs, it's not Russia with Ukraine, it's that Jewish state. Why are they saying that? They're pinning today's society's greatest evil on the Jewish collective in order to claim that the Jewish homeland is illegitimate and has no right to exist. That's the only country in the world that they're saying has no right to exist. And the IRA definition explains that type of anti-Semitism to the world. And that's why it's the only definition of anti-Semitism that's been recognized internationally by international governments. It was established by an intergovernmental agency, so it's not just scholars. There are hundreds of definitions put out there by scholars. This is the only intergovernmental definition established, set out there, adopted, as you heard yesterday, by over 900 entities, governments and other entities around the world. There is no other definition like it, and it is necessary because if we are going to combat today's anti-Semitism, we have to be able to define it.
My question is, I feel like a lot of students I know are quiet Zionists because they're scared of cancel culture and they don't want to ruin their careers. So how can we turn college campuses a space from quiet Zionists to proud Zionists without making people scared that they're going to lose their future because of that?
I was really happy when President Biden said you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. I think the only thing you have to do is believe that Israel has a right to exist. But you're right, we need to be able to create the climate that enables not just Jews, but non-Jews who are Zionists to feel comfortable saying that they're Zionists. We're making progress. There's no doubt. 2 years ago when Rose Rich was confronted with her situation, people had no idea what she was talking about when she said the Zionist component of my Jewish identity. That's become a much more common phrase today, and I think that we are, thanks to you, really, really beginning to turn the tide. And we're beginning to make it clear that when you say those kinds of things, this is an identity issue, not a politics issue. And that's not right. You can't say everybody needs to be welcome at the table with their full identity except the Jews. And that's what we have to make people realize. That's the conversation we need to have. And I think we're having it, and I think we're moving the needle in a real significant way. And that's thanks to you.